A chisel strikes marble in a Florence workshop. The year is 1386. Nobody knows that the baby born in this moment will become the man who teaches stone to breathe. Donato di Niccolò di Betto Bardi. History will shorten this to Donatello. He arrives in a city crackling with competition, ambition, and something else. A hunger to break every rule the medieval world had established about what art could be. Florence in 1386 isn't the Renaissance capital you've read about. That doesn't exist yet. The city is still Gothic, still bound by centuries of artistic convention. Flat figures, emotionless faces, bodies that defy anatomy. This is the world Donatello inherits, and he will systematically demolish it. His father, Niccolò di Betto Bardi, works wool. Not glamorous, but honest. The family occupies the uncomfortable middle, neither wealthy enough for security, nor poor enough to be invisible. They live in the parish of San Pietro Maggiore, a neighbourhood where craftsmen's hammers echo off stone walls, and the smell of dye vats mingles with bread from corner bakeries. We know almost nothing about Donatello's childhood. No letters survive, no diary entries, no fond recollections written in old age. The silence is maddening because we're left wondering, how does a wool worker's son become the greatest sculptor since ancient Rome? The first clue appears in the workshop records. By the time Donatello reaches his teens, he's already apprenticed, not to just anyone, to Lorenzo Ghiberti, one of Florence's rising stars. This matters more than you might think. Ghiberti's workshop isn't a quiet studio. It's a laboratory. Young apprentices grind pigments, mix metals, study ancient texts, and most importantly, they learn to see differently. Ghiberti himself is obsessed with a single question that drives everything he creates. How did the Romans make sculpture look so alive? Medieval art had forgotten this knowledge. For 1,000 years, European sculpture had been stiff, symbolic, decorative. Figures on cathedral facades existed to teach Bible stories, not to move you. They weren't meant to feel real because reality wasn't the point. Heaven was the point. But Ghiberti is reverse engineering antiquity. He studies every Roman fragment he can find, measuring proportions, analysing how ancient sculptors carved muscle and bone. His workshop becomes a school for rediscovering lost techniques. Donatello absorbs everything. He's not the most patient apprentice. Later accounts describe him as impulsive, quick-tempered, wholly uninterested in the diplomatic dance required to please wealthy patrons, but his hands understand marble in ways that make masters nervous. There's a moment that defines young Donatello, though we can't date it precisely. He's working on a figure, probably for Ghiberti's workshop. Another apprentice, older and more experienced, criticises the work. Too rough, too aggressive. The face looks almost angry. Donatello doesn't fix it. He leans into it. The roughness becomes his signature. Where other sculptors smooth and polish and refine until every surface gleams, Donatello leaves the chisel marks visible. His figures have texture, urgency, weight. This shouldn't work. By every established rule, it's wrong. But somehow these imperfect surfaces catch light differently. Shadows pool in the rough stone. The figures seem to breathe. By 1408, Donatello is 22 and working independently. His first major commission comes from the Opera del Duomo, the organisation managing Florence Cathedral's construction. They need a marble figure of David for a buttress high on the cathedral facade. This is a test. Cathedral commissions go to proven masters, not unknown 20-somethings. Someone is taking a chance on him. The figure Donatello delivers is strange. David stands draped in a long mantle, holding Goliath's severed head almost casually. There's no triumph in his pose, no heroic pride. He looks thoughtful, almost melancholy. The opera accepts the work but never installs it on the cathedral. Instead, it ends up in the Palazzo Vecchio. We don't know why. Maybe it was too unconventional. Maybe the patrons got nervous. Maybe Donatello's David was simply too human for a buttress meant to glorify God. But the commission establishes something crucial. Donatello can deliver. More importantly, he can deliver something nobody has seen before. The next decade becomes a blur of work. Donatello takes every commission offered. He carves prophets for the Campanile, saints for the Church of San Michele, reliefs for the baptistery. Each piece pushes further than the last. His Saint Mark, completed around 1413 for San Michele, breaks new ground. The figure stands in a niche, but unlike every other statue in similar niches throughout Florence, this one seems ready to step out. Mark's weight shifts naturally. His robes fall according to actual gravity. His face doesn't display generic saintly serenity. He looks like a specific person, intelligent and intense. Contemporary sculptors study it obsessively. How did Donatello make the marble body feel so present beneath those carved robes? The technique is called contrapposto, borrowed from classical sculpture, but nobody in Florence has managed it this convincingly in centuries. Then comes St. George, completed around 1415. This piece changes everything. Giorgio Vasari, writing more than a century later, will claim that before St. George, marble had never shown such life. It's hyperbole, but only slight hyperbole. George stands alert, watchful. His shield rests against his leg. His expression combines determination with something like worry. This isn't a symbol of courage. This is a young man preparing to fight a dragon, fully aware he might die. The innovation goes beyond the figure itself. Donatello carves a relief panel for the base, showing George slaying the dragon. Here he experiments with schiacciato, flattened relief. The technique creates the illusion of deep space using impossibly shallow carving. Figures in the background seem miles away, despite projecting less than a centimetre from the marble surface. It's a magic trick. It shouldn't work, but it does, and suddenly Donatello has invented a new sculptural language. While Donatello is revolutionizing marble, Florence itself is transforming. The city-state is becoming wealthy, the wool trade booms, banking families accumulate fortunes that would make modern billionaires envious, and wealthy people want art, lots of it. Commissions flood in. Donatello can barely keep up. He takes on assistants, establishes a proper workshop, starts thinking bigger. The Gothic conventions he grew up with now feel like chains. Every project becomes an opportunity to test limits. Around 1416, something significant happens that we only know about through later documentation. Donatello travels to Rome with his friend Filippo Brunelleschi, the architect who will eventually dome Florence Cathedral. The two men spend months in Rome measuring ancient ruins. They're not tourists, they're researchers. They take precise measurements of Roman buildings, analyze proportions, study how classical architects created spaces that still feel miraculous 1,000 years later. Local Romans think they're insane. These two Florentines scrambling over broken columns, arguing about ratios, sketching fragments of lost buildings. The Romans call them the treasure hunters, assuming they're searching for buried gold. But Donatello and Brunelleschi are hunting something more valuable than gold. They're recovering the mathematical principles underlying classical beauty. The trip transforms how both men work. Brunelleschi returns to Florence and begins designing buildings that feel Roman without copying Rome. Donatello returns with new ideas about human proportions, about how bodies occupy space, about the relationship between sculpture and architecture. The knowledge shows immediately in his next major work. Around 1418, the Arte dei Corazzai e Spadai, the Guild of Armourers and Swordmakers, commissions a statue of their patron saint for a niche at San Michele. They choose Saint Louis of Toulouse, a French bishop who gave up a throne to join the Franciscan order. Donatello creates something unprecedented. He casts the figure in bronze, not marble. Bronze allows different possibilities. The saint's robes can flow more naturally. Details can be sharper, but bronze also presents challenges. It's expensive. It's technically demanding. One mistake in the casting process, and months of work become worthless. Donatello masters the technique. The finished Louis stands nearly 7 feet tall, gilded, jewelled, holding a bishop's crozier. The figure radiates authority, but also the kind of calm confidence that comes from someone who chose poverty over power. The guild loves it. More importantly, other guilds notice. Bronze sculpture had been rare in Florence. Suddenly, it's the medium everyone wants. Donatello has opened a new market. He's 32 years old. He's already the most sought-after sculptor in Florence, possibly in Italy. His workshop hums with activity. Assistants rough out marble blocks. Metal workers prepare bronze casts. Apprentices grind pigments for the occasional painted commission. But Donatello himself is restless. He's conquered the technical challenges. He can carve marble that seems alive. He can cast bronze that captures impossible detail. These are victories, but they're not enough. The question forming in his mind is more fundamental. What should sculpture do? What can it make people feel? For 1,000 years, the answer had been simple. Sculpture should glorify God, teach Bible stories, remind viewers of eternal truths. Donatello is starting to think the answer might be different. Maybe sculpture should do something more dangerous. Maybe it should force viewers to see themselves, to confront human complexity, to feel emotions they'd rather avoid. This shift will define everything he creates for the next 40 years. It will produce masterpieces that still disturb viewers 6 centuries later. It will make him famous and controversial in equal measure. The commissions keep coming. In 1423, the Opera del Duomo asks Donatello to create a series of prophet figures for the campanile niches. These aren't meant to be beautiful. They're meant to be powerful. Donatello delivers prophets who look like they've spent years in the desert. Gaunt faces, hollow eyes, bodies consumed by divine vision. One figure, traditionally identified as Habakkuk, is so unsettling that Florentines nickname it Lo Zuccone, the pumpkin head, because his bald skull seems swollen with prophetic knowledge. Vasari will later claim that Donatello would grab this statue by the robes and shout at it, "Speak, damn you, speak!" The story might be invented, but it captures something true. These prophets feel so alive that demanding speech from them doesn't seem absurd. The technique is getting more aggressive. Chisel marks become more visible, surfaces stay rough, proportions distort for emotional effect. Habakkuk's hands are too large, his head sits strangely on his shoulders. None of this follows classical rules, but classical rules produce classical beauty, and Donatello has stopped caring about beauty. He wants presence. He wants figures that grab viewers by the throat and refuse to let go. This is the man approaching his creative peak, a sculptor who has mastered every technical skill available but refuses to rest on mastery, who sees rules as starting points for rebellion, who believes sculpture should disturb as often as it comforts. The wool worker's son from San Pietro Maggiore has become Florence's most dangerous artist, and he's about to create something so shocking that people will still be arguing about it 600 years later. But first, he needs to leave Florence. The city that made him is about to become too small for what he wants to attempt. The invitation arrives in 1427, not from Florence, but from Siena, the rival city 60 kilometers south. The commission comes from the Opera del Duomo there, and it's for a bronze relief panel depicting the Feast of Herod. Standard subject, standard format, standard fee. Donatello accepts immediately. Not because he needs the money, not because Siena's cathedral is particularly prestigious. He accepts because he needs distance. Florence knows him too well now. Everyone has expectations. The guilds want what they've seen before. Patrons want safe versions of his innovations. Even his supporters have boxed him into a role. The daring young master who makes stone come alive. It's a comfortable prison, and Donatello can feel it closing around him. Siena offers escape. A different city, different patrons, different assumptions about what sculpture should be. He packs his tools and moves south for 6 months. The relief he creates there will barely be noticed at first. Bronze panels are common. Biblical scenes are everywhere. The feast of Herod has been depicted thousands of times. Salome dances, John the Baptist is beheaded. His head is presented on a platter at Herod's banquet. Standard iconography. Viewers know what to expect. They won't get it. Donatello approaches the panel like an architect designing a building. He divides the surface into 3 distinct spaces using the new technique called linear perspective, mathematical perspective, where parallel lines converge at a vanishing point, creating the illusion of measured depth. Brunelleschi had theorized it. Masaccio had experimented with it in painting. Donatello is the first to fully realize it in sculpture. The foreground shows the moment of horror. The executioner presents John's severed head on a golden platter. Salome recoils. Herod jerks back from the table, hand raised as if to ward off the sight. Guests scatter in panic. Every figure registers shock, but each reacts differently. One man covers his eyes, another turns away. A third stares in frozen disbelief. The middle ground continues the architecture. An archway frames a second space where servants and guests mill about, some unaware of what's happening in front. The background pushes deeper still. Through another arch, we see distant figures in a courtyard. The space feels vast, not painted onto a flat surface, but carved into it. The bronze is only a few inches deep, but the eye reads it as dozens of feet. Here's what makes it revolutionary. Donatello isn't just showing the moment, he's showing time itself unfolding across space. The beheading happened in the distant background. The head travelled through the middle ground. Now it arrives in the foreground, and we watch the horror ripple outward as different figures realise what they're seeing. It's sequential narrative, compressed into a single image. Film editing 6 centuries before cinema exists. The Sienese commissioners accept the panel politely. They install it in the baptistry font. Visitors notice the fine craftsmanship. A few remark on the clever use of perspective. But nobody understands what Donatello has actually done. He's created a new kind of space in sculpture, not symbolic space where size indicates importance and proximity to God. Not decorative space where figures float in golden abstraction. Real space, measured space, the kind you could walk into if the bronze suddenly became an actual room. He returns to Florence in late 1427 with this knowledge locked in his mind. Perspective isn't just a technical trick. It's a way of seeing the world as it actually is, not as theology says it should be. Human figures aren't symbols anymore. They're bodies in space, caught in specific moments, feeling specific emotions. The old rules are finished. Everything that comes next will be different. But Florence isn't ready for different. The city is comfortable with its artistic innovations. Brunelleschi's dome rises steadily over the cathedral. Masaccio's frescoes in the Brancacci chapel show the new naturalism everyone's talking about. Ghiberti is working on his second set of bronze doors for the baptistery. Florence is proud of being modern. What they don't realise is that Donatello has moved beyond modern into something that doesn't have a name yet. The commissions waiting for him are conventional. More profits for the Campanile, some decorative work for the Medici family, a marble cantoria, a singing gallery, for the cathedral. He accepts them all. He needs the income. More importantly, he needs the materials. Marble, bronze, terracotta. The specific commissions don't matter. They're just excuses to keep working, to keep pushing. The cantoria becomes a riot of dancing putti, chubby children so energetic they seem ready to tumble off the marble. Classical? Yes. Decorous? Absolutely not. These aren't idealized angels. They're rowdy kids celebrating with pagan abandon. The relief carving is so deep it's almost freestanding sculpture. Light and shadow play across the surface, making the figures seem to move. You can almost hear the music they're dancing to. Cosimo de' Medici is watching. The banker who's gradually becoming Florence's unofficial ruler has been collecting art for years, but he's never met an artist like Donatello. Most sculptors are respectful, even obsequious, around wealthy patrons. They take commissions, follow instructions, deliver what's requested. Donatello argues. When Cosimo suggests a change, Donatello explains why it's wrong. Not rudely, but firmly. He talks about weight distribution, about how viewers' eyes will move across a surface, about emotional impact. Cosimo has never heard an artist speak this way, like someone solving mathematical problems, but problems involving human feeling. They begin a relationship that will last decades. Not quite friendship, the class divide is too wide for that, but something closer than patron and artist. Cosimo provides steady income and freedom. Donatello provides works that enhance Cosimo's reputation as a discerning collector. The arrangement works because both men understand that great art requires risk. Cosimo is willing to be disturbed. Donatello is willing to disturb. Around 1430, something shifts in Donatello's workshop. The commissions are good. The income is steady. He's 35 years old, at the height of his technical powers. He should be coasting. Instead, he starts working on something nobody asked for, a bronze statue, slightly under life size. The figure is young, maybe 15 or 16, male, though the body is soft, almost feminine. He stands in contrapposto, weight on one leg, the classic pose borrowed from ancient Greece. He's completely naked except for boots and a strange decorated hat. In his right hand, he holds a sword. At his feet lies the severed head of Goliath. This is David, the shepherd boy who killed a giant with a sling and a stone. Every sculptor in Italy has carved him. He's always shown as a hero, strong and confident. Donatello's David looks like a boy who just realized what he's done. The face is dreamy, almost disconnected. One hand rests on his hip, the other lets the sword dangle loosely. He's standing on Goliath's head, his foot touching the dead giant's face, but he doesn't seem to notice. There's no triumph here, no heroic pride, just a strange, disturbing ambiguity. Why is he naked? The Bible says nothing about nudity. Why does he look so young, so soft? Why is his expression so distant? The bronze itself is extraordinary. Donatello has cast it with a surface that seems almost alive, not polished smooth like most bronze, but with a subtle texture that catches light like human skin. The anatomy is perfect, but it's not idealized. This is a specific body, not a generic youth. You can see the vulnerability. And there's something else, something nobody will talk about directly for centuries. The statue is beautiful in a way that makes viewers uncomfortable, not because it's crude or obscene, because it's sensual. The curve of the hip, the delicate features, the strange intimacy of the pose. This isn't a religious image meant to inspire devotion. It's something more complicated, something that doesn't fit into any existing category. Donatello keeps the statue in his workshop. He shows it to almost no one. This isn't ready for public display. Florence isn't ready. Maybe nobody is ready. But he's made it anyway because the question that's been forming in his mind for years has finally crystallized. What happens when you strip away all the symbolic meaning and just show the human being? Not an idealized version, not a moral lesson, just a body, a moment, a person caught in time. The answer is disturbing. Remove the symbolic scaffolding, and what's left is ambiguous, vulnerable, strange. Human beings aren't simple. They don't fit into neat moral categories. They contain contradictions. They feel things they can't name. They're beautiful and disturbing at once. This is what sculpture should show. Not the world as theology wants it to be. The world as it actually is. The David stays hidden for now, but word spreads through Florence's artistic community. Donatello has made something unprecedented, something dangerous. The younger sculptors start coming by the workshop, hoping for a glimpse. Some are excited, others are scandalized. The older generation is horrified. This isn't how sacred subjects should be treated. This isn't how the human body should be displayed. Donatello doesn't care about the controversy. He's already thinking about the next problem. The David proved he could strip away symbolism. Now he wants to prove he can strip away beauty. He wants to make something so ugly, so disturbing, that viewers can't look away. He wants to test how far sculpture can push before it breaks. The opportunity comes from an unexpected source. A wooden crucifix is commissioned for the Church of Santa Croce. Crucifixes are everywhere in Florence. Every church has several. They follow strict conventions. Christ's body should be beautiful, even in death. The suffering should be dignified. The whole image should inspire reverence and peace. Donatello carves a peasant dying in agony. The body is emaciated, ribs jutting out, muscles slack. The face is twisted in pain. There's no dignity here, no transcendence, just a human being experiencing the worst death imaginable. His friend Brunelleschi sees it and is appalled. According to Vasari, Brunelleschi tells Donatello, "It seems to me that you have put a peasant on the cross, not a body like that of Jesus Christ, which was most delicate, and in every part the most perfect human form ever created." Donatello's response is characteristic. "If it was as easy to do as to judge, my Christ would seem to you to be Christ, and not a peasant. So take some wood and try to make one yourself." Brunelleschi does exactly that. He carves his own crucifix, showing Christ as beautiful and serene even in death. The two works end up in different churches, a few blocks apart. For centuries, they'll represent two opposing views of what art should do. Brunelleschi's Christ offers comfort. Donatello's Christ offers truth. The controversy makes Donatello more famous and more isolated. Patrons still want his work, but they're more careful now. They specify exactly what they want. No surprises, no experiments. He takes the commissions and ignores the restrictions. He's reached the point where his reputation is strong enough that he can get away with almost anything. Besides, he's working on something that will make everything else look tame. A sculpture so strange that nobody will know what to do with it. But that moment is still years away. First, he needs to master one more material. He needs to understand what happens when you take clay, shape it quickly while it's wet, and fire it into terracotta. He needs to work fast without the ability to revise. He needs to capture the first impulse, the immediate feeling, before thought and technique smooth it away. The answer will arrive in the form of an old man's face, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Donatello is 49 years old. He's been carving marble for 3 decades. He knows stone the way most people know their own handwriting, but terracotta's different. Clay doesn't resist, it yields. It records every fingerprint, every moment of hesitation. You can't hide in clay. He starts with small pieces, portrait busts, nothing important, just exercises. The medium forces him to work quickly. Once clay starts drying, you're fighting it. You have maybe an hour before it becomes unworkable. No time for perfectionism, no time to overthink. The first few attempts are disasters, too much detail. He's treating clay like marble, trying to carve precision into something that demands spontaneity. The faces look tight, controlled, dead. He throws them away and starts over. Then something clicks. He's working on a portrait of an old man. Nobody important, just a model from the street. Donatello stops trying to make it beautiful. He stops trying to make it dignified. He just looks at the face in front of him and captures what's there. The wrinkles, the sagging flesh, the way age pulls everything downward, the weariness in the eyes, the slight asymmetry of features that have been shifting for 7 decades. He works fast, letting his fingers remember what his eyes see before his brain can interfere. When he's done, the bust looks like it might speak. It looks more alive than most living people. The old man's entire history is written in that clay. You can see the years of work, the disappointments, the small joys, the acceptance of mortality. It's the most honest thing Donatello has ever made. And it's ugly, not grotesque, just real. The kind of real that makes people uncomfortable because they see themselves. Word spreads among Florence's wealthy families. Donatello can capture likeness better than anyone. They start commissioning portrait busts. They want terracotta because it's cheaper than marble and faster to produce. They think they're getting a bargain. What they're actually getting is the truth. Donatello doesn't flatter. He doesn't soften. He doesn't make people look younger or nobler or more intelligent than they are. He shows them as they are. Some patrons are delighted, others are horrified. Several refuse to pay. One patron demands Donatello destroy the bust entirely. He refuses. The rejected busts pile up in his workshop. Merchants who thought they'd look like Roman emperors, minor nobles who wanted to appear wise, rich women who expected to look 20 years younger, all of them captured with brutal accuracy, all of them unsellable. But something interesting happens. The younger generation loves them. Artists studying in Florence come to see Donatello's rejects. They understand what he's doing. He's showing that sculpture doesn't have to idealize. It can document, it can reveal, it can be evidence of what it means to be human, flaws and all. This matters more than it might seem. For centuries, sculpture has been about representing types: the saint, the hero, the beauty, the wise man. Individual differences get smoothed away in favor of universal ideals. Donatello is suggesting the opposite, that the particular is more interesting than the universal. That one specific face, captured honestly, reveals more about humanity than any idealized version. The approach will influence portrait sculpture for the next 500 years, but in 1433, it mostly just makes Donatello poor. The rejected commissions aren't bringing in money. He needs a major project, something that will restore his reputation with the people who actually pay. The opportunity arrives from an unexpected source. Cosimo de' Medici has just been exiled from Florence. His political enemies have won. The Medici banking empire, which has dominated Florence for decades, is temporarily broken. Cosimo is living in Venice, waiting to see if he'll ever return. But Cosimo's allies in Florence are already planning his comeback. They need public projects that will remind the city of Medici generosity. They need art that will make the family look good. They commissioned Donatello to create an outdoor pulpit for the Cathedral of Prato, a small city near Florence. It's a strange commission. Outdoor pulpits are rare. This one needs to be attached to the cathedral's exterior corner, high up, so preachers can address crowds in the piazza below. It needs to be visible from a distance, and it needs carved panels that people can see from ground level, maybe 40 feet down. Donatello realizes this is actually perfect for his purposes. The distance means he can't rely on fine detail. He has to work bold. The outdoor setting means natural light will hit the carvings at different angles throughout the day. He can use that. And the religious subject matter gives him an excuse to explore something he's been thinking about: dancing. The panels are supposed to show angels. Traditionally, angels are depicted standing still, singing, playing instruments with careful dignity. Sacred figures don't move much. Motion implies instability. Holiness should be calm. Donatello carves angels who are dancing like they've lost their minds. They're spinning. Their robes are flying. Their hair is whipping around. Their bodies are twisted in mid-leap. They look like they're at a festival, not in heaven. Some of them might be drunk. The effect from ground level is startling. The figures seem to be actually moving. As you walk around the pulpit, the changing angles make them appear to shift and dance. The deep carving creates shadows that change with the sun. The whole thing is alive in a way that still sculpture shouldn't be. Religious authorities are immediately suspicious. This doesn't look devotional, it looks chaotic. Where's the reverence? Where's the contemplation? Why are these angels behaving like tavern dancers? Donatello's answer, when pressed, is typically defiant. Joy is sacred too. Ecstasy is a form of worship. Why should angels be solemn? If they're in paradise, shouldn't they be celebrating? The authorities don't have a good counter-argument. The pulpit stays. But the commission takes 5 years to complete. Donatello works slowly, partly because he's experimenting with the carving technique, partly because he's dealing with his growing reputation as difficult. Studios around Florence are full of stories. Donatello refuses to compromise. Donatello insults patrons to their faces. Donatello throws tantrums. Donatello is impossible. All of it is true. He's gotten worse as he's gotten older. He has no patience anymore for people who think they know better than he does. He has no interest in making patrons comfortable. He's reached the point where he'd rather not work than work on someone else's terms. This attitude doesn't make him popular, but it makes him respected. Artists understand that his difficult behaviour comes from the same place as his genius. He refuses to compromise in his personal dealings because he refuses to compromise in his work. You can't separate the two. In 1434, Cosimo de' Medici returns to Florence in triumph. His exile lasted barely a year. His enemies have been exiled in turn. The Medici are back in power, stronger than before. And Cosimo hasn't forgotten who stayed loyal. Donatello gets a commission that will define the rest of his career. Cosimo is renovating the monastery of San Lorenzo. He wants it to be the Medici family church, a statement of their piety and power. He needs sculpture, lots of it, and he's willing to let Donatello work however he wants. No restrictions, no committees, no interference, just make something worthy of the Medici name. This is the moment Donatello has been waiting for. Complete freedom, unlimited resources, a patron who trusts him. He's 60 years old. He's spent 4 decades learning his craft. He's experimented with bronze, marble, terracotta, wood. He's mastered every technique. He's broken every rule. Now he's going to make something nobody has ever seen before. He starts with the sacristy doors. Bronze, 8 panels showing saints and martyrs, but not standing in formal poses. These figures are arguing, gesturing, moving through space. Each panel is like a frozen moment from a play. You can almost hear them talking. Then the pulpits, 2 of them bronze covered with reliefs showing the Passion of Christ. But instead of the traditional sequence of carefully separated scenes, Donatello creates something that looks like chaos. Figures overlap, perspectives shift, space compresses and expands. The story doesn't flow linearly. It circles back on itself. Events that happened at different times appear in the same panel. Critics will later call these works confusing, too complex, too difficult to read. They're right. Donatello is deliberately making sculpture that can't be understood in a single viewing. You have to return. You have to study. You have to work to see what's happening. He's making art that respects the viewer's intelligence by demanding effort. But the centerpiece of San Lorenzo isn't sculpture at all. Cosimo wants a library, a place where scholars can study the ancient texts that the Medici have been collecting. He asks Brunelleschi to design the architecture. He asks Donatello to consult on the decoration. This should be straightforward. But Donatello and Brunelleschi haven't worked together since the crucifix controversy. They've spent 15 years avoiding each other. Their friendship never recovered from that argument. Now they have to collaborate on Cosimo's most important project. The tension is immediate. Brunelleschi wants clean lines, perfect proportions, classical simplicity. Donatello wants decoration, detail, visual richness. They fight about everything. Column capitals, floor patterns, window frames. Every design decision becomes a battle. Cosimo, watching his 2 most talented artists tear each other apart over his library, makes a decision. He separates them. Brunelleschi gets the old sacristy. Donatello gets the decorative elements within it. They'll work in the same space but on different problems. Neither has authority over the other. It's a diplomatic solution. It's also unstable. The old sacristy becomes a kind of battleground. Brunelleschi creates a perfect cube, geometrically pure, architecturally harmonious. Donatello fills it with sculpture that deliberately disrupts that harmony. Coloured terracotta tondi in the pendentives, bronze doors with figures that project forward, a sculptural program that refuses to sit quietly within Brunelleschi's architecture. The result is magnificent and uncomfortable. The architecture and sculpture are fighting each other. Neither wins. They create a tension that makes the space electric. You can feel the conflict. It's uncomfortable. It's also unforgettable. Brunelleschi's furious. This isn't collaboration. It's sabotage. Donatello is deliberately undermining his vision. The two men stop speaking entirely. When they die years later, they'll still not have reconciled. Their friendship, which began in those early years exploring Rome together, ends in mutual resentment over artistic principles neither could compromise. But Donatello isn't thinking about friendship anymore. He's thinking about his next project, the one that will be so strange that 500 years later, scholars will still be arguing about what it means. Cosimo has given him another commission, a sculpture for the courtyard of the new Medici palace. Subject matter, David, the shepherd boy who killed Goliath, the same subject Donatello carved in marble decades ago. This time will be different. This time, Donatello has a vision so radical that even Cosimo hesitates when he hears the description. But Cosimo trusts Donatello. He gives permission. And Donatello begins work on the sculpture that will become his most famous and most controversial creation. The sculpture that will make the marble David look conservative. The sculpture that will change what sculpture can be. But we're not there yet. First, Donatello needs to solve a technical problem that nobody has attempted in 1,000 years. He needs to cast a life-size bronze figure that stands on its own without support. He needs to understand weight distribution, balance, bronze thickness, internal armatures. He needs to reinvent a lost technology. The answer will come from studying ancient Roman bronzes and making dozens of small-scale experiments. The process will take years. It will nearly bankrupt him, and when he's finally ready to cast, everything will go wrong. The casting pit is 15 feet deep. It has to be. Molten bronze at 2,000 degrees needs gravity to flow properly into the mould. Any air pocket, any impurity, any miscalculation of thickness means the entire casting fails. And you can't just try again. Bronze is expensive. Donatello has spent months preparing this single attempt. The mould sits in the pit, carefully constructed from clay and wax. The wax model inside is perfect. Every detail of David's face, the texture of his hair, the straps of his hat, the feathers on his boot, all of it will melt away when the bronze pours in, replaced by metal, if everything works. Donatello stands at the edge of the pit, watching his assistants tend the furnace. The bronze has been melting for hours. It needs to reach the exact right temperature. Too cool, and it won't flow into the fine details. Too hot, and it burns away the mould material, creating gaps and flaws. His hands are shaking. He's 60 years old. He's cast bronze before, obviously, dozens of pieces, but nothing this large, nothing freestanding, nothing this ambitious. The ancient Romans could do this. They left behind massive bronze statues that prove the technology existed. But the knowledge died with them. Donatello has had to reconstruct everything, from observation and experimentation. The furnace master signals. The bronze is ready. The crucible, a massive ceramic container holding hundreds of pounds of molten metal, is lifted carefully from the furnace. The glow is almost white. The heat is unbearable, even at a distance. The workers, their faces wrapped in wet cloth, carry it toward the pit using long metal poles. Donatello watches. His entire reputation is about to be determined by what happens in the next 60 seconds. They pour. The bronze streams into the mould, opening like liquid fire. The sound is a roar. Steam explodes from vents carefully placed throughout the mould. The smell is acrid, overwhelming. The workers keep pouring, steady, controlled. You can't stop once you start. Any hesitation creates a cold joint, a weakness in the metal that will crack. The crucible empties. The last drops fall into the mould. Then silence. Now they wait. The bronze needs days to cool slowly. Rush it, and thermal stress creates cracks. The mould needs to cool at exactly the right rate, maintaining even temperature throughout. Donatello has buried it in sand to control the cooling process. 3 days later, they begin excavating. The mould comes out intact. That's the first good sign. They carefully break away the outer clay layers. The bronze underneath is dark, rough, covered in the texture of the mould material. They work slowly, revealing the form underneath. A hand emerges, then an arm. The details are crisp. The casting worked. But they won't know if the entire piece is sound until they remove all the mould material and examine the surface. Any air bubbles, any incomplete filling, any cracks mean partial failure at best. The final reveal takes hours. Piece by piece, the mould falls away. And underneath, standing perfect in the afternoon light, is something Florence has never seen. David, life-size, bronze, completely nude except for his boots and hat. Standing in a pose so casual, so naturalistic, that he looks like he might step forward at any moment. His weight on one leg, the other relaxed. One hand holding the sword, the other resting on his hip. His face dreamy, almost detached, looking downward at the severed head of Goliath beneath his foot. The surface is flawless, every detail rendered perfectly. The feathers on his boots, the brim of his hat, the individual curls of his hair. The bronze has captured everything, but it's the pose that's revolutionary. This isn't a warrior. This is a boy, a beautiful androgynous boy. The body is soft, not muscular. The stance is provocative. The entire sculpture reads as sensual in a way that religious art never does. Donatello stands back, examining it from every angle. This is what he intended. This is what he cast the bronze to achieve. A sculpture that exists fully in 3 dimensions, that demands you walk around it, that reveals different aspects from every viewpoint. The ancient Romans understood this. Their bronzes were meant to be seen from all sides, placed in the center of spaces where viewers could circulate. Medieval sculpture was always architectural, always against a wall, always frontal. Donatello has brought back something that was lost, but he's also done something the Romans never did. He's made the sculpture openly erotic. The David is beautiful in a way that invites looking, that makes the viewer aware of looking, that makes the act of viewing feel slightly transgressive. When Cosimo sees it, he's silent for a long moment. Then he asks where Donatello wants it placed. The courtyard of the Medici palace, center of the space, where it can be seen from all sides, where visitors entering the palace will encounter it immediately. Cosimo agrees, but he also understands what he's agreeing to. This sculpture will cause talk. It will make people uncomfortable. It will be controversial in ways that religious sculpture usually isn't. He installs it anyway, because Cosimo, whatever else he is, understands that great art doesn't play it safe. The reaction is immediate and divided. Some viewers are awed by the technical achievement, by the return of large-scale bronze casting, by the naturalism of the pose. Others are scandalized by the nudity, by the sensuality, by something they can't quite articulate, but that makes them deeply uncomfortable. The sculpture becomes a talking point. Visitors to the Medici palace make a point of seeing it. Some stare, some look away, nobody is indifferent. Donatello has achieved something strange. He's created a work that's simultaneously a religious image and a pagan celebration of physical beauty. David, the biblical hero, and David, the beautiful youth, exist in the same body. The sculpture refuses to choose between them. This ambiguity will haunt interpretations for centuries. What exactly is Donatello saying here? Is this a Christian triumph? A classical revival? A homoerotic fantasy? An allegory of Florence defeating tyranny? The answer is probably yes to all of it. Donatello isn't interested in single meanings. He's interested in complexity, in works that resist easy interpretation, in art that makes you think and feel simultaneously. The David establishes his reputation as the greatest sculptor of his generation. Nobody else is doing anything remotely like this. Ghiberti is still making beautiful bronze doors, but their reliefs still essentially flat. Donatello has created something that exists fully in three-dimensional space, but success brings its own problems. Cosimo has other commissions. The Medici palace needs decoration. Donatello is the obvious choice. He creates a series of bronze reliefs for the palace, classical subjects mostly. The Medici want to associate themselves with ancient Rome, with sophisticated learning, with the revival of classical culture. Donatello gives them cupids and satyrs and dancing figures. Technically perfect, emotionally cold, something is wrong. The work is competent but not inspired. Donatello is going through the motions. The fire that burned in the David isn't there. He's painting by numbers, executing commissions efficiently, producing work that satisfies clients without satisfying himself. The problem is Florence. He's been here too long. Everyone knows him. Everyone has expectations. Every work is compared to his previous works. He's become a brand rather than an artist. He needs to leave. He needs to work somewhere nobody knows his reputation, where he can experiment without the weight of past success crushing every new attempt. The opportunity comes from an unexpected direction. Padua, a city in the Veneto, part of Venetian territory, about 150 miles northeast of Florence. The city fathers want a major public sculpture, an equestrian monument to a condottiere named Erasmo da Narni, known as Gattamelata. It's an unusual commission. Equestrian monuments were traditionally reserved for rulers. Ancient Rome had left behind several famous examples. The Marcus Aurelius, on horseback in Rome, was the most famous. Medieval Europe hadn't attempted anything comparable. The technical challenges were too great, the political implications too sensitive. But Gattamelata had been a loyal commander for Venice. His heirs wanted a monument. The Paduans were willing to permit it, and they needed someone capable of casting a horse and rider in bronze, larger than life, freestanding in a public square. There's only one person in Italy who can do this, Donatello. He accepts immediately. Not because of the prestige, though that matters. Not because of the payment, though he needs it. He accepts because it's an excuse to leave Florence, to start over somewhere new, to attempt something nobody has done in 1,000 years. He's 62 years old when he arrives in Padua. Most artists are winding down at this age, repeating successful formulas, training assistants to carry on their style. Donatello is about to begin the most ambitious project of his career. The technical problems are immense. A bronze horse, larger than life, standing on 4 legs. The weight distribution has to be perfect or the legs will buckle. The casting has to be done in sections and then assembled, which means creating joints strong enough to support the weight, while invisible enough not to ruin the aesthetic. And then there's the rider, Gattamelata in full armour, sitting naturally on the horse, commanding but not stiff. The horse and rider have to feel like a unified composition, not 2 separate sculptures stacked together. Donatello spends months just on the planning. He builds a full-scale model in clay. He calculates weight, stress points, optimal thickness for the bronze. He designs an internal armature, a metal skeleton that will support the bronze shell. The Paduans watch with fascination and growing anxiety. The costs are mounting. The timeline keeps extending. Donatello keeps insisting everything has to be perfect. They let him work, partly because they're committed, partly because there's no alternative. You don't fire Donatello halfway through and find someone else to finish an equestrian monument. The casting takes 2 years. Horse first in sections, then the rider. Each piece is a separate technical challenge. The horse's legs have to be cast solid, not hollow, to support the weight. The body can be hollow, but needs to be thick enough to maintain structural integrity. The rider needs to be balanced perfectly, so his weight doesn't tip the composition forward. When they finally assemble all the pieces, Donatello discovers a problem. The horse's head is slightly too heavy. The forward tilt is almost imperceptible, but it's there. The entire composition feels like it might topple forward. He solves it by adjusting the rider's posture. Gattamelata leans back slightly in the saddle, his weight counterbalancing the horse's head. It's a tiny adjustment. It saves the entire sculpture. The monument is unveiled in 1453. It stands in the Piazza del Santo, outside the basilica. Larger than life, bronze, ancient Rome reborn in modern Italy. The reaction is immediate. This isn't just a sculpture, it's a statement. Padua has done what no other Italian city has managed. They've created a public monument that rivals antiquity. Donatello has done more than that. He's proven that the lost knowledge of the ancients can be recovered, that modern artists can match the technical achievements of Rome. The Renaissance isn't just about imitating classical culture, it's about equaling it. But Donatello isn't there for the unveiling. He's already left Padua. The work is done. The monument stands. He doesn't need to watch people admire it. He's 70 years old. He's completed the most ambitious sculptural project of the century. He should retire, rest, enjoy his fame. Instead, he goes back to Florence, back to the city he left, back to the competitions and rivalries and expectations he tried to escape. He has unfinished business there. One more sculpture to make, one final statement. Florence hasn't changed. The streets are the same, the workshops are the same, but everything feels different. Donatello left as the city's most celebrated sculptor. He returns as an old man who's been away for a decade. The city has moved on. New artists have emerged. Lorenzo Ghiberti, who won that baptistry competition 40 years ago, is now the elder statesman of Florentine art. His second set of bronze doors, the ones for the east entrance, are nearly complete. They're spectacular. Everyone agrees. Even Michelangelo will later call them the gates of paradise. And there's a younger generation rising. Men in their 20s and 30s who grew up studying Donatello's work, but who are now developing their own styles. Luca della Robbia is making glazed terracotta sculptures. Antonio Rossellino is carving marble portraits. Andrea del Verrocchio is still a teenager, but already showing promise. The city doesn't need Donatello anymore. Not the way it once did. He's respected, certainly, honoured, but he's also past his prime. At least that's what people assume. They're wrong. Donatello still has one more revolution in him. The commission comes from the Medici family. Cosimo de' Medici, the unofficial ruler of Florence, wants a sculpture for the courtyard of his new palace. Something bronze. Something that will demonstrate the Medici's sophistication and their connection to classical antiquity. He asks Donatello, not Ghiberti, not one of the younger sculptors, Donatello. Because despite everything, despite the decade away, Cosimo knows that Donatello is still the only artist capable of creating something genuinely new. The subject is David, the young shepherd who killed Goliath. It's a popular theme in Florentine art. The city identifies with David, the small republic that defeated larger enemies through courage and cleverness. Donatello has already sculpted David twice before, once in marble for the cathedral early in his career, once in bronze for a private patron, though that version has been lost. This will be his third, David, his final David, and it will be like nothing anyone has seen before. He starts with the pose, David standing over Goliath's severed head, one foot resting on it casually. Victorious but relaxed, this part is conventional. But then Donatello makes a choice that shocks everyone who sees the finished work. He makes David nude, completely nude except for a hat and boots. This isn't unusual in classical sculpture. Ancient Greek and Roman artists depicted nude figures constantly. But in 15th century Florence, in Christian art, nudity is rare. Sacred figures are clothed. Even when artists depict nude bodies, like in paintings of Adam and Eve, there's always a sense of shame attached. The nudity represents fallen humanity. Donatello's David has no shame. He's confident, beautiful, young. His body is slender, almost androgynous. His weight shifts onto one leg in a classical contrapposto pose. One hand rests on his hip. The other holds Goliath's sword, point down, casual. He wears a laurel-crowned hat that marks him as a victor. His boots are elaborately decorated, and between these two pieces of clothing, there's nothing but bronze skin. The sculpture is installed in the Medici Palace courtyard around 1440. Nobody knows what to make of it. It's beautiful. Everyone agrees on that. The craftsmanship is flawless. The pose is elegant. The proportions are perfect. But it's also deeply unsettling. This is supposed to be a biblical hero, a figure from sacred scripture, and Donatello has rendered him as a classical god. Worse, there's an erotic quality to the work that nobody can quite articulate, but everyone senses. David is young, probably 14 or 15. His body hasn't fully developed. There's a softness to the forms, a vulnerability mixed with the confidence, and the positioning of Goliath's head between David's legs creates an ambiguous, disturbing visual relationship. One of Goliath's wing decorations on his helmet actually touches David's inner thigh. This isn't accidental. Donatello doesn't make accidents. Some scholars today argue that this is the first freestanding nude sculpture since antiquity. They're probably right, but that misses the real radicalism of the work. This isn't just a technical achievement. It's a complete reimagining of what religious art can be. For centuries, Christian art has been about transcendence, about directing the viewer's attention away from the physical body towards spiritual truths. Saints are shown as holy, not as human. Their bodies are vehicles for divine grace, not objects of aesthetic appreciation. Donatello collapses that distinction. David is both sacred and sensual. He's a biblical hero and a beautiful youth. The sculpture celebrates the physical body while depicting a spiritual victory. It's synthesizing Christian content with pagan form in a way that makes both traditions strange. The Medici keep the sculpture. They understand what Donatello has done, even if they can't fully explain it. This is what they wanted, something that demonstrates their sophistication, their learning, their connection to both Christian and classical traditions. Something that shows they're not just wealthy merchants, but true Renaissance princes. But not everyone is comfortable with it. When Savonarola takes control of Florence decades later, during his brief theocratic rule in the 1490s, the David becomes controversial. Some want it destroyed as pagan and immoral. It survives, but the discomfort lingers. What was Donatello thinking? Why make this choice? We don't know. He left no explanation, no letters discussing his intentions, no recorded conversations about the meaning of the work. All we have is the sculpture itself. And the sculpture is ambiguous by design. You can read it as a celebration of youthful beauty. You can read it as a meditation on power and vulnerability. You can read it as a provocative challenge to artistic conventions. You can read it as all of these simultaneously. That's the point. Donatello isn't interested in clear, simple meanings anymore. He's interested in complexity, in creating works that generate multiple, sometimes contradictory responses. The David is his most radical statement of this principle. After the David, Donatello keeps working. He's in his 70s now, but he doesn't stop. More commissions come, more sculptures are made, but nothing else reaches the level of innovation he achieved with the David. He's exhausted the possibilities. He's explored every aspect of sculpture that interests him. Emotion, realism, classical form, religious content, technical mastery. He's done it all. In 1453, Constantinople falls to the Ottoman Turks. The Eastern Roman Empire, which has survived for 1,000 years after the Western Empire collapsed, finally ends. Greek scholars flee to Italy, bringing manuscripts and knowledge. The Renaissance accelerates, but Donatello barely notices. He's focused on smaller, more personal projects now. A wooden sculpture of Mary Magdalene for the baptistry. She's emaciated, aged, covered in her own hair. It's disturbing, powerful. Nothing like the beautiful figures he usually creates. He's exploring suffering now, mortality, the decay of the body. His own body is failing. He can still work, but the physical labour of sculpture is becoming difficult. He relies more on assistants, delegates more tasks, focuses his diminishing energy on the details that matter most. The Florentine government gives him a pension. It's not much, but it's enough. Recognition of his contributions to the city. He accepts it without ceremony. In 1466, at the age of 80, Donatello dies. He's been working almost until the end. He dies in Florence, in the city where he was born. He's buried in the Basilica of San Lorenzo, beneath the church floor, near the Medici family tombs. It's an honour, a statement about his importance, but there's no grand monument for him. No elaborate tomb sculpture, just a simple marker. His work is his monument, and it will outlast everything. The immediate impact is obvious. Every sculptor in Florence has been influenced by Donatello. His techniques, his approaches, his innovations have become the foundation of Florentine sculpture, but the deeper influence takes longer to manifest. 30 years after Donatello's death, a young sculptor named Michelangelo is studying in Florence. He's brilliant, arrogant, convinced of his own genius. He studies Donatello's work obsessively. The early marble David in the cathedral, the bronze David in the Medici palace, the Gattamelata in Padua, which Michelangelo visits specifically to study. Michelangelo will later claim that he learned nothing from other artists, that his genius was entirely his own. This is false. You can see Donatello in everything Michelangelo creates. The emotional intensity, the psychological depth, the willingness to depict the human body with unflinching realism, the ability to combine classical form with Christian content. These are all lessons that come directly from Donatello. When Michelangelo carves his own David in 1504, it's a response to Donatello's versions. Michelangelo's David is massive, over 14 feet tall. He's adult, muscular, powerful. He's everything Donatello's bronze David is not. But that's the point. Michelangelo is in conversation with Donatello, arguing with him, trying to surpass him, and Michelangelo isn't alone. Raphael studies Donatello, Leonardo studies Donatello. Every major artist of the High Renaissance is building on foundations that Donatello laid. They take his innovations further. They develop his techniques into new directions. But they're all working in his shadow. The strange thing is how quickly Donatello's actual works become overlooked. Within a generation, people are more interested in Michelangelo and Leonardo. Donatello becomes a historical figure, respected but not actively studied. His sculptures remain in Florence, in Padua, in Siena, but they're not the centre of artistic attention anymore. The art world moves on. This continues for centuries. During the Baroque period, Donatello's work seems too restrained, too classical. During the neoclassical period, it seems too emotional, too realistic. He doesn't fit neatly into any category. The reassessment begins in the 19th century. Art historians start studying the early Renaissance more carefully. They realise that almost everything that happens in Italian sculpture for 200 years traces back to Donatello, that his innovations weren't just technical, they were conceptual. He changed what sculpture could be. Today, Donatello is recognised as one of the foundational figures of Western art, right there with Michelangelo, Leonardo, Raphael, the first among equals. But there's still something elusive about him. We have his works, we have the documentary evidence of his life, but we don't have his voice. No letters about his artistic philosophy, no recorded statements about what he was trying to achieve. Just the sculptures, and the sculptures are enough. They speak more clearly than words ever could. Look at the marble David in the Bargello Museum in Florence, made when Donatello was in his 20s. It's competent, skilled, entirely conventional. Now look at the bronze David in the same museum, made 40 years later, It's revolutionary, disturbing, impossible to categorize. That trajectory from convention to revolution took an entire lifetime. It required decades of technical mastery, decades of thinking about what sculpture could be, decades of pushing against the limits of the medium. Donatello didn't start radical, he became radical through work, through constant experimentation, through refusing to repeat himself even when repetition would have been profitable. He could have made a career out of creating beautiful Madonnas. Churches would have paid well for that. Instead, he made suffering saints, brutal prophets, ambiguous heroes. He could have stayed in Florence, accepted commissions from the wealthy families, lived comfortably. Instead, he went to Padua and took on a project that might have destroyed his reputation if it failed. He could have retired after the Gata Malata, enjoyed his fame. Instead, he came back to Florence and created the most controversial work of his career. That restlessness, that refusal to settle, that's what makes him extraordinary. Not just the technical skill, though that matters, not just the innovations, though those matter too, it's the attitude, the conviction that an artist's job is to keep pushing, to keep asking what else is possible, to keep refusing easy answers. Donatello died 8 years before Columbus sailed to America. He never knew that the Renaissance he helped create would spread across the entire world, that his innovations would become the foundation of Western sculpture for 500 years, that art students in the 21st century would still study his works, still analyze his techniques, still argue about the meaning of his bronze David. He just made sculptures, one after another, for 60 years, each one an attempt to solve a problem, to capture something essential, to push a little further than the last one. That's all. That's everything. In the Basilica of San Lorenzo in Florence, there are 2 pulpits, bronze, massive, covered in relief panels depicting scenes from the life of Christ. They're Donatello's last works. He was in his 70s when he started them. He never finished. When he died, the panels were incomplete, scattered, waiting for someone else to assemble them. The pulpits are strange. Even by Donatello standards, they're strange. The compositions are crowded, chaotic. Figures overlap in ways that seem almost random. The space is compressed, claustrophobic. There's none of the clarity you see in his earlier reliefs, none of the careful spatial organization. Everything feels urgent, desperate, unresolved. Some scholars think the chaos is intentional, that an old man facing death was expressing something about human suffering that required this kind of visual disorder. Others think it's simply unfinished work, that if Donatello had lived another year, he would have refined the compositions, clarified the space, brought order to the chaos. We'll never know. The work is what it is, raw, difficult, impossible to look away from. Stand in front of these pulpits, and you're seeing an artist at the absolute end of his life, still working, still pushing, still refusing to do anything the easy way. He could have made something elegant, something peaceful, something that would have served as a graceful farewell to 6 decades of work. Instead, he made these, brutal, uncompromising, filled with bodies in agony and figures crushed by grief. The crucifixion, the deposition, the entombment, scenes of death and suffering rendered with an intensity that borders on unbearable. This is what it looks like when an artist refuses to lie. When someone who has mastered every technical aspect of their craft chooses to use that mastery to show something true rather than something beautiful. The pulpits aren't trying to comfort anyone. They're not offering easy consolations about death or redemption. They're showing what it actually looks like when a human being suffers and dies. Donatello was 77 years old when he created these. He'd been making sculptures for 60 years. He'd seen everything the medium could do, and at the very end, with nothing left to prove, he chose to make the most difficult, most uncompromising work of his career. That tells you something about what drove him. It wasn't fame, he already had that. It wasn't money, he'd never cared much about that anyway. It wasn't the approval of his peers or the admiration of patrons. It was something else, something internal, a need to keep working at the edge of what was possible, to keep asking questions that didn't have comfortable answers. The relief panels show bodies twisted in pain, faces contorted by grief, spaces that feel like they're collapsing inward. There's no escape, no relief, no place for the eye to rest. You're forced to confront the full weight of human suffering without any aesthetic distance. This is as far from the pretty Madonnas of earlier Florentine sculpture as you can get. This is an old man who knows he's dying, looking directly at death and refusing to blink. After Donatello died in 1466, the panels sat in his workshop, incomplete, unassembled. His assistants and followers eventually put the pulpits together, filling in the gaps as best they could. The result is strange, hybrid. Part Donatello, part someone else. You can feel the difference. The panels that are fully his have that raw intensity. The filled-in sections are competent but ordinary. Even incomplete, even assembled by other hands, the pulpits are extraordinary. They don't belong to any neat category. They're not early Renaissance. They're not quite late Renaissance either. They're something else. The work of an artist who spent his entire life refusing to fit into categories. Walk through Florence today and you can trace Donatello's career in the city's museums and churches. Start with the marble David in the Bargello, then the St. George in the same museum, then cross the river to the crucifix in Santa Croce, then the Annunciation in the same church, then the Cantoria in the Museo dell'Opera del Duomo, then the bronze David back in the Bargello, then finally the pulpits in San Lorenzo. Each work shows you something different, a different set of problems being solved, a different way of thinking about what sculpture can do. If you look at them in order, you can watch an artist's mind evolving over 60 years. You can see someone who never stopped learning, never stopped experimenting, never stopped pushing. But here's what you can't see: the thousands of hours of work, the failed experiments, the sculptures that didn't work and were destroyed or abandoned. The times he must have doubted himself, questioned whether he was on the right path, wondered if he should just do what everyone else was doing. We only see the finished works, the ones that survived, the ones that succeeded. We don't see the process, the struggle, the constant decision-making that goes into creating something that's never been created before. That invisible labour is what makes the visible results possible. Every breakthrough you see in a Donatello sculpture represents hundreds of hours of work you don't see. Every innovation is the result of countless small decisions, adjustments, refinements. Every masterpiece is built on a foundation of practice, failure, and stubborn persistence. This is true for any artist, but with Donatello, it's especially striking because his innovations were so fundamental. He wasn't just getting better at doing what other people did, he was inventing entirely new ways of making sculpture. And that kind of invention requires a different kind of effort. Not just technical practice, but conceptual risk-taking. The willingness to try things that might fail completely. The bronze David is the perfect example. Nothing like it existed. No model to follow, no precedent to build on. Just an idea, a vision of what might be possible, and the technical skill to attempt it. And even with all that skill, it must have been terrifying. What if it didn't work? What if the proportions were wrong? What if people hated it? He made it anyway. That's the lesson. Not that it was easy, not that he knew it would work, that he made it anyway. That's what separates him from the competent sculptors of his era who filled Florence's churches with adequate but forgettable works. The willingness to risk failure in pursuit of something that had never been done before. Look at his late style, and you see that willingness taken to its extreme. The pulpits in San Lorenzo don't play it safe. They don't consolidate earlier achievements. They don't offer a comfortable summary of a distinguished career. They push into new territory. They risk looking chaotic, uncontrolled, even ugly, because that's what the subject matter demanded. And Donatello was more interested in being true to his vision than in being liked. That attitude, that commitment to the work above all else, that's what makes him important. Not just historically important, though he is that. Important as an example, as a model of what it means to be an artist. Not someone who finds a successful formula and repeats it, but someone who keeps searching, keeps questioning, keeps refusing to settle. The Renaissance is full of these figures: Leonardo, Michelangelo, Titian, artists who worked into old age and kept innovating until the very end. But Donatello was the first. He established the pattern. He showed that an artist's career didn't have to be a steady decline from youthful brilliance to tired repetition, that it could be a constant evolution, that the late work could be as radical as the early work, just in different ways. Modern sculpture begins with him. Everything that comes after, every bronze figure, every freestanding nude, every attempt to capture psychological depth in a static form, every experiment with spatial illusion in relief, all of it traces back to innovations Donatello made in the 15th century. Rodin studied him, Bernini built on him, Canova learned from him. Every sculptor who came after had to reckon with what he'd done. Even when they rejected his approach, they were defining themselves against him. His work became the baseline, the foundation, the starting point. But influence isn't the point, not really. The point is the work itself. The sculptures, the things he made, they still exist. You can still see them. You can still stand in front of the bronze David and feel whatever strange combination of emotions it provokes. You can still look at Habakkuk's face and see something human and true. You can still trace the folds of Mary's dress in the Annunciation and understand what it means to render fabric in stone. The works survive because they were made to last. Bronze and marble don't decay easily, but they also survive because they're good, because they offer something that later works don't make obsolete, because no matter how much sculpture evolves, these works remain worth looking at, worth studying, worth returning to. That's rare. Most art becomes historical curiosity, interesting for what it tells us about the past, but not genuinely engaging in the present. A few works transcend that. They remain alive, not frozen in history, but present, active, capable of affecting people who encounter them centuries later. Donatello made several works like that. The Bronze David, the Gattamelata, the Penitent Magdalene. These aren't museum pieces you admire from a respectful distance. They're works that can still disturb, still provoke, still make you reconsider what you thought you knew about art. That vitality comes from the honesty, from the refusal to lie, from the commitment to showing things as they are rather than as people want them to be. It comes from technical mastery placed in service of truth rather than beauty, from a vision that refused to be constrained by contemporary taste or conventional expectations. It also comes from something harder to define, a quality of presence. The sense that these works contain something essential about human experience, that they're not just skillful representations, but revelations, windows into something deeper than surface appearance. Stand in front of the Bronze David long enough and you stop seeing a sculpture. You start seeing an idea made visible. The idea that vulnerability and power aren't opposites, that strength can be slight, delicate, almost fragile. That triumph doesn't have to look triumphant, that the human body can embody contradictions without resolving them. That's not something you can analyze into components. It's not a matter of technique or composition or proportions. It's something that emerges from the whole work, something that only exists because every detail, every decision, every tiny adjustment was made with absolute conviction and uncompromising honesty. You can't fake that. You can't manufacture it through cleverness or calculation. It comes from somewhere deeper, from an artist who spent decades thinking about what sculpture could be, and what truth looked like, and how to make one reveal the other. Donatello didn't write treatises on art. He didn't explain his methods or defend his choices. He just worked, made sculptures, one after another, for 60 years. Each one an attempt to see more clearly, to show more honestly, to push a little further into territory no one had mapped yet. That's the legacy. Not a style that can be imitated or a technique that can be taught, but an example, a demonstration of what's possible when someone commits completely to their work, refuses to compromise their vision, and keeps pushing forward even when the path isn't clear. The sculptures remain silent, powerful, strange, beautiful in ways that have nothing to do with prettiness, true in ways that make comfortable lies impossible. They've outlasted the patrons who commissioned them, the critics who praised or condemned them, the styles that succeeded and replaced them. They'll outlast us too. Long after everyone reading this is gone, someone will stand in the Bargello Museum looking at the bronze David. They won't know our names, they won't care about our opinions, they'll just see the sculpture, and they'll feel whatever it makes them feel. And the work will continue doing what it's done for 6 centuries, making people feel something they weren't expecting. That's what Donatello did better than almost anyone before or since. The final decades of his life were spent in Florence. He returned from Siena in 1461, no longer the dominant force he'd once been. The city had moved on. Younger artists commanded attention. New styles competed for commissions. The classical revolution he'd helped launch had become mainstream, absorbed, normalized. He was in his 70s, old by 15th century standards. His hands weren't as steady. His energy wasn't what it had been, but he kept working. The last major work was a pair of bronze pulpits for San Lorenzo, the Medici family church. They're strange objects, relief panels showing scenes from Christ's Passion and Resurrection. But the execution is rough, almost crude by Donatello's earlier standards. Figures crowd together in compressed spaces. Proportions seem off. Details blur into suggestion rather than clarity. Some scholars have attributed this to declining skill, the work of an aging artist whose technique was failing. Others see assistants finishing panels the master only sketched. Standard narratives of decline, of powers fading, of the inevitable diminishment that comes with age. But look closer at those panels. Really look at them. The roughness isn't weakness, it's rawness. The compression isn't failure of composition. It's intensity pushed to an extreme. The blurred details aren't loss of control. They're deliberate rejection of finish, of polish, of all the refinements that separate art from experience. These pulpits show violence and grief and transcendence rendered with an urgency that makes earlier works seem almost decorative by comparison. They're not beautiful. They're not meant to be. They're meant to hit you in the chest, to communicate suffering and redemption with a directness that perfect finish would only dilute. Michelangelo understood this. His late works, the Rondinini Pietà especially, show the same commitment to truth over beauty, to emotional power over technical display. He'd studied Donatello's work obsessively. You can see it in his sculptures, that same willingness to let technique serve vision rather than the reverse. Donatello died on December 13th, 1466. He was 80 years old. The exact circumstances aren't recorded. No dramatic deathbed scene, no final words preserved for posterity. Just an old man dying in Florence, his life's work scattered across Italy in churches and palaces and public squares. The funeral was modest, nothing like the state occasions that would mark the deaths of later artists. Michelangelo would get a funeral that lasted days, attended by thousands, with poets composing elegies and princes sending representatives. Donatello got buried in San Lorenzo's crypt, beneath the floor of the church he'd helped decorate. His contemporaries recognized his importance. Vasari, writing 80 years later, called him the greatest sculptor since antiquity, praised his naturalism, his technical skill, his revolutionary approach to relief. The standard biographical treatment. Accomplishments listed, works catalogued, influence noted. But something got lost in that process. The strangeness, the refusal to make things easy or comfortable, or conventionally pleasing, the commitment to truth, even when truth was awkward or ugly or disturbing. Later centuries smoothed him out, made him safe, turned him into a precursor, an early step on the path toward Michelangelo and the High Renaissance. Important but incomplete, admirable but surpassed. A founding figure who'd done well for his time, but whose work naturally looked primitive compared to what came after. That reading misses everything that matters. Donatello wasn't primitive. He was doing something different, something that later artists, for all their greater technical resources, often failed to achieve. He was making sculptures that refused to lie. The 20th century began to understand this better. After modernism shattered the academic tradition, after artists like Giacometti and Brancusi and Moore had explored what sculpture could be when freed from classical ideals, people started looking at Donatello differently. They saw the expressionism in his late work, the psychological intensity, the way he used distortion not as failure, but as tool, the preference for truth over beauty. Suddenly he didn't look primitive, he looked contemporary. Walk through the Bargello today and watch people encountering the bronze David. Some stop for 30 seconds, take a photo, move on, standard museum behaviour, but others freeze, stand there longer than they planned, circle the sculpture, come back for a second look, try to figure out what just happened to them. That's the work doing what Donatello designed it to do. Not presenting something to be admired from a respectful distance, but creating an experience that disrupts comfortable assumptions. About art, about bodies, about power, about how representation works. The same thing happens with the Magdalene. People expect a saint. They get a human being destroyed by grief and sustained by faith. The disconnect between expectation and reality forces them to look harder, think differently, question what they thought they knew about religious art. That's the real achievement. Not technical innovation, though Donatello mastered every technique available to him. Not stylistic influence, though his work shaped sculpture for generations. Not classical revival, though he helped make ancient art relevant to his contemporary world. The real achievement was creating works that remain alive, that continue functioning as art, rather than historical artifacts, that can still provoke, disturb, challenge, move people who encounter them 6 centuries after they were made. Very few artists manage that. Most work dates. Becomes interesting primarily for historical reasons. You study it to understand its period, its context, its place in the development of style or technique. You appreciate it. You don't necessarily feel it. Donatello's best works transcend that limitation. They're not just important, they're present, active, capable of creating experiences rather than merely representing subjects. The question is why? What makes some art survive as art while other work survives only as history? Part of it is technical mastery. If you can't control your medium completely, you can't make it do what you need. Donatello could carve marble, cast bronze, work in wood, model in terracotta. He understood materials, knew what each one could and couldn't do, used their properties rather than fighting against them. Part of it is psychological insight. Donatello understood how people work, what makes a figure seem alive, how gesture reveals character, why some expressions read as genuine while others feel performed. That knowledge came from observation, from years of watching how bodies move, how faces respond, how people carry themselves in different emotional states. Part of it is formal intelligence, composition, proportion, balance, rhythm, balance, all the structural elements that make visual art work. Donatello didn't follow formulas. He understood principles, could apply them or break them as the situation demanded. But those are just tools, necessary but not sufficient. Plenty of technically skilled artists with psychological insight and formal intelligence have produced work that's now forgotten or reduced to historical curiosity. What separates Donatello is something harder to define. Call it honesty, the commitment to showing things as they are rather than as convention demands, the refusal to prettify or simplify or make things easier than they actually are. That honesty operates at every level, in the choice of subjects, in how those subjects are rendered, in the details included and excluded, in the relationships between figures, in the way space is structured and surfaces are finished. It's not literalism. Donatello wasn't copying reality, he was interpreting it, making decisions about what to emphasize, what to minimize, how to organize visual information so it communicates clearly. But those decisions were always in service of truth rather than beauty or convention or patron expectations. That's what gives the work its staying power. Truth wears better than fashion. Honesty outlasts style. Works that show things as they remain relevant, even when the specific circumstances that produce them have vanished into history. The sculptures exist in multiple time frames simultaneously. They're 15th century objects, products of specific historical conditions. But they're also immediate presences, things you encounter in the moment, with your own eyes and body and response, and they're permanent statements, contributions to the long conversation about what human beings are and how we understand ourselves. That simultaneity is rare. Most art lives primarily in one time frame. Either it's historically important but aesthetically dead, or it's immediately appealing but historically shallow, or it makes grand claims about permanence that time exposes as pretension. Donatello's best works maintain all three time frames without contradiction. They're historically crucial, they remain aesthetically powerful, and they continue functioning as art rather than artifact. The influence extends beyond sculpture. Painters learned from Donatello. Raphael studied his reliefs. Titian absorbed his approach to bodies. Caravaggio's theatrical lighting and psychological intensity owe debts to Donatello's work. Even artists who never saw his sculptures directly worked in traditions he helped establish. But influence isn't the point. Influence is historical. What matters is the work itself. The objects Donatello made, whether they still function, whether they can still do what art is supposed to do. Stand in front of the Gatta Malata, and you're not thinking about influence or historical importance or technical innovation. You're experiencing a sculpture, responding to its presence, its power, its particular way of organizing space and material and meaning. That response is what matters. Not the scholarly apparatus, not the historical context, not the interpretive frameworks. Those things help understanding. But understanding isn't the goal. Experience is. Donatello understood this. He didn't make sculptures to be studied. He made them to be encountered, to create experiences that couldn't be reduced to verbal explanation, to show things that couldn't be said. The best art always does this. It exceeds language, not because it's vague or mysterious or deliberately obscure, but because it communicates in ways language can't match, through form and material and presence, rather than words and concepts and arguments. You can write about the bronze David endlessly, analyze its composition, trace its influences, interpret its meanings, but none of that captures what happens when you stand in front of it, the actual experience of seeing it, the way it makes you feel and think and question. That experience is what survives. What makes the work matter 6 centuries later? What keeps it alive rather than merely preserved? Donatello made objects that could do that. Not always. Some works are historically interesting but aesthetically inert. Some were destroyed or lost. Some never quite achieved what he was reaching for. But enough succeeded. Enough works retain that quality of presence, that capacity to create experience rather than merely represent subjects. Those works are the legacy, Not the technical innovations or stylistic influences or historical importance, but the sculptures themselves, existing, present, still capable of doing what Donatello designed them to do. They'll outlast everything written about them, all the scholarship, all the interpretation, all the historical analysis, because they're not arguments or theories or explanations. They're things, physical objects occupying space, made from bronze and marble and wood, shaped by human hands according to human vision. And as long as they exist, they'll keep doing what they've always done, standing in museums and churches and public squares, silent, patient, waiting for someone to stop and look, really look, long enough to see past the surface, past the subject, past the historical distance, long enough to encounter something that's not quite art and not quite history, but something else entirely, something that exists between those categories, something that can only be experienced, never fully explained. That's what Donatello left behind. Not a style or technique or approach that can be learned and repeated, but an example, a demonstration of what's possible when someone commits completely to seeing clearly and showing honestly and letting truth matter more than beauty. The sculptures remain, doing what they've always done, making people feel something they weren't expecting, showing them things they didn't know they needed to see, proving that art can be more than a decoration or illustration or historical document, proving that it can be truth. Looking at what remains after someone dies is always strange. The body goes, the voice stops, the daily presence vanishes. What's left are the things they made, if they made things worth keeping. Donatello left sculptures, bronze, marble, wood, terracotta, objects scattered across Italy in churches and museums and public squares. Some are famous. Most people who've heard of Renaissance art know the bronze David. Others are obscure, tucked away in small churches, seen by few. But here's what's remarkable about those objects. They're not memories. They're not records of something that used to exist. They are the thing itself. The actual work, not a copy or reproduction or description. The bronze that Donatello cast, the marble he carved, the surfaces his hands shaped. Time hasn't diminished them, hasn't turned them into quaint relics of a distant era. They remain fully present, active, capable of creating experiences rather than merely documenting history. Walk into the Bargello Museum in Florence on any random Tuesday. Watch people encounter the bronze David for the first time. Some stare for 30 seconds, others circle it multiple times. Come back. Stand there trying to figure out what they're seeing, what it means, why it affects them. That's not historical interest, that's art functioning as art, creating responses that can't be reduced to understanding or appreciation or scholarly analysis, making people feel things they weren't prepared to feel. The marble prophets on the Campanile do the same thing, the Gattamelata in Padua, the pulpits in San Lorenzo. Each one remains capable of stopping someone in their tracks, of forcing them to look harder, think differently, question assumptions they didn't know they had. This is rare. Most art becomes historical curiosity, interesting for what it tells us about the past, but not genuinely engaging in the present. A few works transcend that limitation. They escape history while remaining historical objects. They exist simultaneously in multiple time frames without contradiction. Donatello made several works like that. Not everything he created. Some pieces are competent but ordinary. Some didn't survive. Some never quite achieved what he was reaching for. But enough succeeded. Enough works retain that quality of presence, that capacity to create experience rather than merely represent subjects. Those works don't need defense or explanation or scholarly apparatus to justify their existence. They justify themselves through their continued capacity to function, to do what art is supposed to do, whatever that is. Nobody agrees on the definition, but everyone recognizes it when it happens. The influence extends in every direction. Every sculptor who came after had to reckon with what Donatello did. Even when they rejected his approach, they were defining themselves against him. His innovations became the baseline, the foundation, the starting point. But influence is just history. What matters is the work itself. Whether it still functions, whether it can still create the experiences it was designed to create. The answer is yes. Obviously, yes. The Bronze David hasn't stopped working. The Gatta Malata hasn't become inert. The late reliefs haven't lost their power to disturb. 6 centuries haven't diminished them. This tells us something about what makes art last. Not beauty, though some of Donatello's works are beautiful. Not technical perfection, though his technique was extraordinary. Not innovation, though he revolutionized sculpture. What makes art last is truth, honesty, the refusal to lie about what things are or what they mean or how they feel, the commitment to showing rather than telling, to creating experiences rather than delivering messages. Donatello spent 60 years learning how to do that, how to make bronze and marble communicate things that words can't capture, how to show the complexity of human experience without simplifying or prettifying or making it easier than it actually is. The sculptures are evidence of that learning. Each one represents thousands of hours of work, hundreds of decisions, countless small adjustments and refinements. The visible results rest on invisible foundations of practice, failure, and stubborn persistence. You can't see the process, only the result. But the result carries the weight of everything that went into it. The decades of technical mastery, the commitment to honesty over convention, the refusal to settle for anything less than what the work demanded. That's what makes them different from competent but forgettable sculpture. Not superior skill exactly, though Donatello's skill was exceptional, but the use of that skill in service of something beyond skill. In service of truth, however uncomfortable or disturbing or strange that truth might be. The late works especially demonstrate this. The pulpits in San Lorenzo, the penitent Magdalene, works that refuse to offer comfort or beauty or easy answers, that insist on showing human suffering and transcendence with a rawness that makes earlier works seem almost decorative. These aren't the products of declining powers. They're the culmination of a lifetime spent learning how to see clearly and show honestly. The roughness isn't weakness, it's the final refinement, the last unnecessary layer stripped away. Michelangelo understood this. His late Pietas show the same trajectory, the same movement from technical display towards something more essential, the same willingness to sacrifice beauty for truth. He'd studied Donatello obsessively. You can see it in his work, that same refusal to lie. The tradition continues. Every sculptor who cares more about truth than prettiness is working in territory Donatello mapped. Every artist who uses technical mastery to show things as they are, rather than as convention demands, is following a path he cleared. But that's still just influence, history. What matters is the work itself, the actual objects, whether they continue doing what they were designed to do. Stand in the Bargello long enough and you'll see it happen. Someone will stop in front of the Bronze David. Really stop. Not just pause for a photo, but actually encounter the work. And something will shift in their face, some recognition or disturbance or question that wasn't there before. That's the work functioning, still, after 600 years, still capable of creating experiences that exceed explanation, still doing what Donatello designed it to do. The sculptures will outlast everything written about them. All the scholarship, all the interpretation, all the historical analysis, because they're not arguments or theories or explanations. They're things, physical objects occupying space, made from bronze and marble and wood, shaped by human hands according to human vision. As long as they exist, they'll keep doing what they've always done, standing in museums and churches and public squares, silent, patient, waiting for someone to stop and look. Really look. Long enough to see past the surface, past the subject, past the historical distance, long enough to encounter something that can only be experienced, never fully explained. Something that proves art can be more than decoration or illustration or historical document. Something that proves it can be truth. That's what remains. Not a man who died in 1466. Not a biography or historical narrative or list of achievements, but sculptures, objects, works that continue functioning as art rather than artifact, that remain alive rather than merely preserved. Donatello made those, spent 60 years making them, one after another, each one an attempt to see more clearly, to show more honestly, to push a little further into territory no one had mapped yet. The sculptures remain, doing what they've always done, making people feel something they weren't expecting, showing them things they didn't know they needed to see, proving that stone can breathe if you know how to make it.